Hi. So this is going to be the first of a series of videos that I'm going to do on client-side testing. In particular, I'm going to be using a package called Karma and also Jasmine to run my tests, and we'll talk a little bit about what those tests are. So I've got a little bit of a game plan here. So we're going to set up client-side testing, we're going to set up a framework, and we're going to test an employee. So we're not going to do any Angular testing here. We're just going to end up getting our environment set up in a very simple way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a directory for my project, and we'll call this NWin testing, and I'm going to cd into it. Okay, so what I really want to be able to do is I want to be able to run my test. So there's nothing here that's going to allow this to happen. What I'm going to do is I'm going to first initialize, do my npm init. And if I were to go over here and just do npm test, I would just see the default echo over here. So let me open up Vim and let's get this set up. So one thing that's really important is that when we've done testing before with Jasmine, and we've done it from the we've actually done it through Node, and Node testing is a little bit easier because we could end up the Node environment is installed locally, and we could run our tests fairly easily. The thing that's a little bit trickier about writing our tests for client side is that when we think about client side, we need a browser. Again, because we're writing our tests not to test out in the Node environment, but to test out in the browser environment. And so in order to do that, we have to have some mechanism for a browser to load and for our code and for our tests to load. And that's what Karma does. So Karma is a test runner. Karma is going to basically gather up all the files that are going to run, load them in a browser, and report back to you on the tests. And so what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to be able to do something like this, to be able to say, hey, Karma, we want you to start. We don't have Karma installed yet, so let's install it. So we're going to say npm install Karma. This only needs to be a development dependency. So we're going to say save dev. It'll go out and get Karma. And if we go to our package JSON file, if this has installed, which it hasn't yet, could take a few seconds. What's going to happen if we go back here? It's going to say, do you want to reload this? We'll say yes. And we'll see that it ended up installing as a dev dependency. It ended up installing Karma. So if I was to go over here and say Karma, still nothing's going to happen. But the way that Karma installs, worth noting, if I go to node modules, there's a bin folder, and I could say Karma, and this is going to be an executable for Karma. And Karma has a couple of commands. The one we're interested in is Karma start. And here it's actually starting a server that's going to go and load our tests. And again, let's not think about this as a server for our application. This is a server purely to run our client-side tests. And again, there's no requirement. When you think about your application, there's no reason for your server-side environment to be even running when you're running your client-side test, because you're isolating code that's going to be run in the browser. And again, you don't need your server-side environment set up or running in order to do this. So let's not mix up this browser for this server for the server that we're going to need for our environment to run our mean application. So what we're going to do here, there's another thing. Karma is running this, but it really has no idea really what tests to load or that sort of thing. So how do we tell Karma, hey, here are our files for here's our source code, and here's our test code, and this thing should be loaded in a specific order, because we know that when we run things in a browser, we do have dependency issues where one thing, Angular, needs to load before our app file loads, our app file needs to load before our controllers end up loading, and so on and so forth. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to initialize Karma. And we could initialize Karma. Karma has another command called init, and these are probably the only two that you really need to run. Now this is going to take us through a bunch of questions, and let's actually look at them as we go through here. First thing it's going to say, hey, what framework do you want to use? And we're going to use Jasmine for this. We could use Mocha. If we use Mocha, there's just a little bit more work that we have to do, and I'm just trying to avoid the number of dependencies that we have. So we'll start out with Jasmine here. Maybe we'll switch it at some point. So we're going to use Jasmine as our framework for the tests themselves. Here's something about using require.js. I've never used it on the client side, so I'm going to just say no to that. And it's going to say, how do you want this to run? What browsers do you want us to use to run your test? And you could run multiple browsers. You could even run a headless browser, which is something called Phantom.js, but I'm actually going to run my test with Chrome. And so we'll use the Chrome browser. And here it's actually saying, where do your files live? Where, how should I end up loading things? So you can see here it's giving you like some patterns. And you can see js/star.js or test ****spec. And here, you could see how these would work. The first one, it's going to end up looking in a JS folder, and it's going to load everything with a .js extension. I'm going to keep this very simple, and I'm going to say, hey, look, I've got one file, and my file is called spec.js, and it's even going to bark at me a little bit when I do this and say, hey, look, there are no files that match this pattern, just in case, you thought there were, and that's okay. We'll end up adding it later on. Here's some, are there files that you want to exclude, that you want to make sure you don't load, even though they match what you have before? And I'm going to say no. Here's an interesting one. Here it's going to say, hey, look, if there are any changes, any new files added, any files changed, do you want us to rerun your tests? And for this, I'm going to say yes. Okay? So now I've got my configuration file loaded. And if I go back here and I end up running this start command again, what's going to happen is that it's actually going to load the Chrome browser here, and it's actually waiting for tests. And it gives me an error here, and the error is, hey, look, you haven't given me any tests. So let's actually go and set up a test for this. So here's my file here, and again, one step at a time, let's add our spec.js. You'll notice actually if I come back here, this will have restarted. So there's a watcher here that's looking out for that happening. And usually you don't have to restart, although, we could, just as easily have, killed this process and, run this again. You don't have to do that. The only time that you really have to kill the process and rerun it is if you modify your Karma configuration file. So, and I didn't even actually go over that yet, so we'll actually take a look at that as well. So let's actually do this. So when we ended up doing Karma init, it ended up creating this configuration file. And again, Karma is running with Node. It's going to be looking, it's a Node module. It's going to be looking for this config file by default. And here are some of the settings that we put in. Here's our Jasmine framework. Here are our list of files that we want to load. We have no excluding files. Here's a preprocessor if you had to do like transpilation or compiling of CoffeeScript or something along those lines. Here are reporters that will run when our tests run. Here's the port that we're using. Colors, there's some log levels. Auto watch means that is the setting where if we end up making changes, it'll sit here and basically watch for any changes and rerun our tests. So let's go back and let's take a look at our spec file. And by default, since we actually said we were using Jasmine, Jasmine is available to us. Let's say that we're going to describe an employee. And my sort of sanity check here is to say, hey, look, it exists. There's going to be some employee constructor that exists. Again, we're not even really talking about Angular yet. We'll end up bringing that in the next video. And I'm going to say I expect employee to be defined. And if you were using Mocha, this would be a little bit different. You'd have to bring in an expectation library, and you might say expect employee to be okay or something along those levels. Once I do that, and I go back here, now I'm going to get this error message that no, in fact, employee is not defined. Now, just to set things up, obviously I'm going to want to put these in different files because my test files aren't going to be part of my application. They're part of my test suite. But I'm going to go over here and just to get the ball rolling, and I think it's totally legitimate when you're starting out with testing, or even if you wanted to do test-driven development, you could do this just to get started. And here I'm going to end up getting my test to pass. Now, one thing that I would like to do is, and we could write one more test just to make this a little bit more clear, is that I'm going to say, let's go over here and we'll say, I'm going to say describe. So we could nest describe blocks, which is pretty common. And I'll just say creating an employee. And I'll say when I create an employee, I'm going to do a before each here. And what do I expect? I'm going to say that when I create this employee that doesn't exist, I'm going to say has a name of Mo. And really, if you're going to sort of write this out as a full test, all right, you might say creating an employee with the name of Mo, right, has a name of Mo. And we could go over here and we say expect, right, write out our expectation. So I'm doing lowercase e. This is going to be an instance of an employee. Employee.name to equal Mo. And again, this is watching. So when I go back here, it's going to say employee is not defined. And we could go over here. And we could actually, we don't necessarily need the before each here. This runs, you've seen this before, pardon the pun. But I'm going to go over here and I'm going to put employee, right, just to get a little bit of a different error. And here it'll say, cannot read property name of undefined. So what we're going to do is that once we go into our before, the idea here is that even if it's not asynchronous, you set up everything in your before block and you just have a very sort of short one-liner for what your expectations are. And I'll say employee equals new employee. And again, we run into that same issue, right, where we have this, now we have an object back, but it doesn't have a name property. And we'll go over here and we'll pass in Mo. And we'll go to our employee and we'll say that we're passing a name into employee, right? And this goes back to foundations, which you've seen before. And now we'll end up getting our test to pass. So that's nice, but I would like it if our output for our test was a little bit prettier. Again, this might not be a very big deal for you, but there's a couple of different what are called reporters. Now you notice I killed my process. The reason why I killed my process is that I want to go back to my Karma config file. And you can see that there are reporters. And there's only two that we can end up using at the moment, but there's any number of ones that are out there. Now, this is one that you might have seen before, which are dots. And if I go back here and I run Karma start, this will run, and you'll see two dots for two passing tests. This is no better than the other one. In fact, I think it's a little bit worse. I really want this to sort of wow me a little bit with what its output is. So what we're going to end up doing here is, let me pull Chrome up for a second. So there's a module that you can install called Karma Spec Reporter. And this will give you the option of adding this spec reporter. Now, one of the things also worth noting here is that if you go and you look at something on NPM, you look at these numbers here, you could sort of, because there probably are other modules that have similar sounding names to these, but this is probably the one that I'm looking for, right? You can see the number of downloads in the last day. So we're going to end up installing this. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to kill this process, and I'm going to say npm install Karma spec reporter. And again, this is just as a dev dependency. And I'm going to get this. This is going to be pretty quick. There's probably not a ton going on here. If you're interested, you could go in and look and see how that works. But now if I put in spec, I think that you will agree that if I go and run this, you'll see that you're going to get a nice output here. So here we can read this pretty well, right? Employee exists, creating an employee with the name of Mo, has a name of Mo. Looks good, okay? The wording could be a little bit better, but overall looks pretty good. The other thing that I'm going to do here is that I'm going to take this command that I have here, and let me actually put it in my package.json file so it's a little bit easier to run. Now, I'm going to put this not in test because I'm going to run my test when I start looking at deploying my application. We're going to look at setting up a continuous integration environment and see how that works. I'm going to do that in another video. So I'm just going to say test dev here, and I'm just going to put this command in, which is going to be node modules.bin karma start. And this way, I could go back here, and instead of putting this here, I could say npm run test dev, and I should be at the same exact spot. So again, just in summary, client-side tests have to run in a browser. That's what we need Karma for. Karma is a test runner. Karma needs a configuration file, and in the background, Karma is setting up a server to run your tests and report the results to you. We have the ability to set up a test reporter. Here we've brought an outside one in that gives us a little bit of a prettier output. We also have the ability to do auto watch, and that helps when we're running locally. When we end up deploying, we're going to want to modify that because we want our continuous integration environment to actually say, all right, I ran your test and they passed. There's no watching of files in a continuous integration environment. In a continuous integration environment, you would end up just doing another push to GitHub, and that's how you would end up, running modifications with your tests. So this satisfied this requirement of setting up the framework. We ended up testing out an employee. We had an employee have a name, and in the next video, we'll look at setting up some more rigorous tests for our employee.